Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. And yes, we have finally hit it, people. We have hit a family of 1,000 subscribers in just a little under 9 months, I believe. But thank you to everyone who keeps subscribing, liking, and following this journey. It has been my dream for a long time now to be actually considered a YouTuber. And now that we have hit this marker, I consider myself a YouTuber. It's crazy. But with that being said, I could not have done it without each and every single one of you who have subscribed, liked, and followed this journey from the very beginning. It has been amazing, and if you are new here, welcome. But yes, we are going to get right into it with the big one, with the memory theory part 2. And I have a couple scenes we're going to talk about, all right, and that talk about memory specifically. And if you did not see part 1, go check that one out, because we talked a lot about Hopper, Bob, and Joyce's involvement, about the fact that they do not remember anything from the first shadow. The origin story involving Henry Creel and all of our parents, from what it looks like. So it gets very interesting that none of these parents, especially Hopper, Joyce, and Bob, did not remember anything about that involving themselves in this show as well. So it literally makes no sense. But the thing about that is we dropped that theory, and then a week later, okay, Tudum happened that weekend. And during the Tudum event, the biggest thing that they talked about in the main part of their whole scenario, okay, that they were doing was memory, okay? It was basically a trip down memory lane. And what did they use? They used VHS tapes as the major prop and reference, okay? So I want to keep that in mind, because I already had this planned. But this theory is going to involve the scene when Brenner and Elle go into that VHS room and they start talking, okay? But we have something to talk about first, so let's get right into it, people. All right, the first scene we're going to go to, it's during the Nina project, all right? And it's when Elle is looking into the camera, all right? And she sees herself young for the first time. It's not when she looks into the mirror, all right? It's when she looks into the camera and she sees her reflection. And then all of a sudden, that's when she gets down and she walks over to the mirror and she sees herself as a young child. So she does not know what's going on. So keep that in mind, that she sees herself young looking into that camera reflection, all right? So there's a connection right there to say just something being recorded, all right? So just keep that in mind. But with that being said, okay, she sees herself young in the mirror, and then all of a sudden the music starts playing, and it's like opera music, right? And basically what he talks about is that this opera, which is also basically a play, okay? So just keep that in mind, that the first Shadow origin story itself is an actual play involving this origin story, which is very interesting. And in my opinion, it's also super interesting that we knew nothing about a Vecna or the Creel house or all of that shit, all right? All the way up until season 4, and then all of a sudden they dropped this first Shadow origin story in play and on Broadway and stuff. And now all of a sudden there's this major connection to this origin story involving this whole entire show. And we had 3 full seasons of not knowing a damn thing about this Vecna or Creel house, like I said. So it makes no sense, right? But the thing that you got to keep in mind is that our parents are involved with this origin story. So the biggest question is, like I keep saying, and I said it a lot in the first one, is why do none of these parents remember? Well, I think we get an answer to this involving this scene partially, and then involving that next scene with the VHS tapes. But basically, Brenner starts talking about the opera, and he starts reciting a story about it, okay? And he basically says that it's about a young woman's lover who died in a duel, okay? And her name was Nina. And basically, Nina buried this memory, okay? She buried this memory of her lover dying in a duel and wanted to forget about it, from what I'm assuming. And then Brenner says something very specific that's very interesting, in my opinion. He goes, as if it never happened. So basically, Nina buried this memory as if this never happened whatsoever. Okay, so there's a comparison to what's going on here, so just keep that in mind. And then basically he says that every day Nina would return to the train station, okay, to wait for her lover's return, a return that would never end up happening. And if only Nina could remember the truth. But the thing you got to keep in mind is this is kind of a hint at like repressed memories, okay? When something traumatic happens or something bad happens and people push that aside so much that they literally think that this did not ever happen to them. They literally think that if someone was to tell them that this happened to them, they would not believe it. This is a real thing, okay? But what I want you to keep in mind is that we find out later in a later memory during the Plinko scene, okay, which we talked about in the Plinko theory, so go check that one out as well. But in that scene, I'm only going to hint at it, okay? During that scene, Henry basically tells Elle that Papa doesn't always tell the truth, okay? So that's the only hint I'm giving you. Just keep that in mind about Papa, that apparently he does not always tell the truth. We don't know know if that is the truth, but just keep that in mind. But basically, Brenner finishes okay, and 11 asks, she goes, is this real? And Brenner says, no, this is not real, but once it was. And then 11 jumps in and she basically says that it was a memory, okay? So you got to keep that in mind, that this is when we find out that the whole Nina project is involved with memory, okay? But the more important thing is, I want to ask you this, is do you think these memories, specifically everything we saw in the Nina project, is actually factual? And what I mean by that is, do you guys think 11 is seeing her own memory, or do you think Brenner is showing her someone else's memory and he's making 11 believe that this is her memory, okay? So basically what I'm saying is, place someone else in Elle's position, okay? Someone else that we do not know of or whatever, just anyone else, not 11. But then think about it like this, okay? That if this Nina project is a way for them to use memories, all right, and make someone remember something they have no memory of, if you really think about this logically, okay, basically this is done to help them remember, right? But why could they not do the opposite and make someone forget something? So I hope you're getting what I'm saying, but if they have the power to make someone remember something, a repressed memory that they buried, okay, because they have VHS tape proof of it or whatever, why would it not be possible for them to do the exact opposite, specifically Brenner, okay? And I'm not saying Owens, because Owens is involved with this Nina project trying to help 11 remember. But the thing about that as well is, does Owen know what's on all of these VHS tapes? Has he seen all of these VHS tapes himself? Does he know what Brenner is showing 11 during this whole Nina project? Does Owens actually know that he is showing her the correct footage, is my question. Yes, I do believe, but I'm starting to question this whole Nina project as if this is factual or if any of this actually happened truthfully, okay? But let's continue, and real quickly before we jump into the next scene where they go into that VHS room and they start talking a little bit more about why 11 can't remember, okay? Real quickly, I just want to hint on the fact what Brenner says to 11 during this, okay? Right before this whole scene ends and this whole memory that we see on camera ends, all right? Basically, after 11 just figures out that this is a memory, okay, Brenner says that you need to find your own way out. So keep in mind, he says you need to find your own way, all right? And then he says right after, you need to leave your train station and to stop waiting, to focus and remember. So logically, with what Brenner is saying, he's telling 11 right here, in my opinion, he's telling her to create her own path or create her own memory in a sense. So that's the biggest question of why I'm asking you is, do you guys think that this could be someone else's memory? And I have somebody in mind, but I'm going to keep that till the end, all right? But let's keep going and let's get into the scene where they go into that VHS room, all right? So right before we see 11 and Brenner actually go into that room, okay, that I believe this is kind of a short little flashback or kind of like two scenes in one, all right? Because they're sitting in this room with like the brain scanners and they're talking the whole time and during this whole scene. But then it shows us the clip of them going into the VHS room. So timestamps are a little off here, okay? But basically they're talking and they're sitting there and Brenner brings up the fact that 11 had a stroke. And basically he's talking about season 3, okay, what she did during season 3, how she'd used too much power or whatever. And basically apparently that caused her to have a stroke, or at least her brain is showing signs of a stroke from what he's seeing on that screen. But remember, if Papa doesn't always tell the truth, we do not know if this is factual necessarily. This could just be a story he is telling 11 for as far as we know. But basically he turns around and he looks at 11 and he grabs her head and he says, your abilities are still in there, but you just need to remember. So I'm going to ask you this because there's something confusing about what Brenner says here, all right? Because there's a scene earlier on in the show, specifically the very end of season 1, okay, when 11 uses her powers to an extreme extent. Right at the end of season 1, okay, when we see her do that to the Demogorgon and vanish that Demogorgon as well as herself, okay, we now all of a sudden are getting a story of 11 doing this to Henry Creel, okay, number 1 in the Rainbow Room. So now there's this random connection to what 11 did with the Demogorgon and also with what she did to Henry Creel, except those two things look a lot different in my opinion. In a way, they both kind of look like it's kind of going snowy, like a screen on a television screen, okay? You know when it goes snowy or like it's all hazy and stuff? In my opinion, it kind of looks like that when these gates are opening, okay? And when these two characters, specifically the Demogorgon and Henry Creel, are like breaking from the middle of their body, all right, and getting sucked into that. But what you got to keep in mind, there's a major difference here, okay, from this Nina Project memory versus what we see in season 1. And I'm sure you already understand, but 11 did not disappear in this Nina Project, okay? She did not go and put herself in there as well. But when we see this in season 1, 11 disappears into the Upside Down. And we obviously know this because at the very beginning of chapter 2 in season 2, we see how 11 got back into Hawkins in the real Hawkins, right? So logically, there's something confusing here about this, people, is that he says that she had a stroke using her power, okay, which makes a lot of sense to me, but I feel like that is a throw off in a sense, because what we see in season 1, we see 11 use her powers basically the same way, right? Except when we see her again in season 2 and how she got out, we do see that she's a little weak, right? We see that she's kind of weak and that she's trying to find Mike and she wants to get out of the Upside Down, but then she sees that half open portal. But then what does 11 do? She walks up to that portal, she kind of puts her hand through it, she steps back, and then she uses her powers and she opens it. So logically, if we think about this correctly, why did 11 not lose her powers at the end of season 1 like she did at the end of season 3 and all of this shit? And how did she not have a stroke in that moment when she basically did the same exact thing, okay? And this is what Brenner says, that she doesn't remember, okay? She needs to remember this stuff from the Nina Project, okay? But logically, at the end of season 1, 11 doesn't forget anything either, because when she comes out of the Upside Down, all right, where does she go? She goes right to Mike's house from memory, people. She obviously remembers her way around and from the school to Mike's house by herself. So she obviously didn't lose any memory, and she obviously didn't lose any of her powers. So what does this mean? But then we get this jump scene, okay, and this is when it shows Brenner and 11 walking into this VHS tape room, okay, and it shows him put a code on, and the code is 1451, which also, if you add all those numbers together, that equals 11, which I found very interesting. But basically, while they are walking into this room, Brenner straight up tells 11, okay, and this is something we need to remember for season 5, especially that they use the VHS tapes as a reference and a prop during Tadum, and especially that the whole event was based off of memories, okay? So basically, Brenner tells 11 straight up that everything that happened in his lab is recorded on tape. Every success and every failure, all right? So logically, at the end of the Nina Project, or at least what we saw of the Nina Project during the Papa episode, when all of the military come and raid this place, basically the last time we see these tapes is the soldiers running into this room. So they are the ones who have these tapes, in my opinion, now. But basically, as he's explaining these tapes, he tells 11, it's important for you to not just see your memories or see your past. It's also extremely important for you to fully re-experience it. So I'm going to jump in with a question right here. I want to ask you, and I want to know your thoughts about this, okay? We see him tell her this, that it's important for her to fully re-experience her past. So with that being said, now that we see in season 4, we're getting hints of this origin story and that all of our parents were involved, okay? Do you think this past memory, this origin story is now infiltrating and coming back, say, to haunt our parents or haunt the kids that are involved with these parents? Because in my opinion, it's a little interesting that all of a sudden, like I said, we're getting this new major character that has so much importance, especially involving our parents, in two of our major characters, Hopper and Joyce, okay? And obviously, Joyce's son is the main purpose of this show, okay? The major purpose of why this show has importance, okay? Will vanished. So no doubt in my mind, the connection of Will vanishing being Joyce's son and Joyce having major importance in the first shadow, there's a very big connection here going on here. But the major question is why? And I really feel like this line, how he says it's important for you not to just see it, but to fully re-experience it. I truly believe season 5 is going to be in ways fully re-experiencing that origin story in a way, but mixed with our Stranger Things story in a sense. So basically, two memories in one or two memories infiltrating each other, which does not sound like a good thing if you ask me. But basically, Brenner says he believes that this could repair her broken signals and that it already has started, okay? And in my opinion, I fully think that he knows that it already has started because 11 has seen herself as a young girl in that memory, okay? She now knows that these are memories she's dealing with, and she now knows that apparently these are her memories, okay? That's what she's being told. But remember, Papa doesn't always tell the truth. So then 11 asks straight up, okay, she asks, well, why do I not remember any of this? And basically Brenner says again that you buried these memories, that she buried them, which is basically the straight connection to the Nina project or the story of Nina and about this woman who repressed or buried a memory so much that she drove herself crazy and didn't even know that she did this to herself. So think about this, people. If Papa doesn't always tell the truth, do you truly believe that 11 forgot all of this? Or do you believe that these memories, these past memories, were taken from her for any reason? Because like I said, if this Nina project can make these people or make whoever remember these memories, okay, why could they not take them away? It just makes too much sense to me involving this whole memory scenario now going big into season 5. So let me know your thoughts. Because basically after Brenner puts blame on 11 that she's the reason she doesn't remember any of this because she doesn't want to, he basically says that brains have a defense mechanism to protect themselves from bad or past memories, or more importantly, trauma, okay? So therefore, our origin story seems like a pretty traumatic event for our parents, correct? So now that we're seeing this Nina project about how memories can be remembered from the Nina project, and if there is an opposite form of this Nina project where they can take away memories, do you think our parents being involved with this origin story, do you think their memories for any reason were messed with? Or do you think only some of our parents' memories might have been messed with and they just don't know it, being Hopper and Joyce and specifically Bob as well? But unfortunately, Bob is no longer with us, so we cannot get an answer from that. But in my opinion, the fact that they are involved directly with trying to figure out what's going on in the first shadow, kind of like Nancy and Jonathan in our group into the Stranger Things, okay? Basically, Hopper, Joyce, and Bob are the Stranger Things of that origin story. So basically, now that we're seeing this and memories just out of nowhere just being remembered, and there's this origin story and this new character and all this shit, okay, do you guys think that our main characters, being Joyce and Hopper specifically, do you think their memories were affected in any way? Whether how Brenner explains if he is telling the truth that maybe they buried these memories, or do you think these memories may have been covered up by other memories specifically, okay, which I kind of hinted at in the first memory theory, so go check that one out if you did not see that one. But this last stuff that Brenner says to 11, okay, I'm going to leave you with, and I'm going to leave you with some questions because I'm going to jump into the memory theory part 3, and I'm going to get that out as soon as possible right after this one, okay? But basically, I want to leave you with this because there's a lot more to talk about involving all of this. This last little bit he says, okay? Basically, 11 tells him that she saw something during this memory, that she saw blood, and a lot of blood, okay? And then all of a sudden it clips to Brenner, right? And he kind of does this look, like he looks down, like he doesn't want to bring this up, okay? Because then he says, he goes, that was another memory. That was a powerful one, a one invading from her subconscious, okay? So let me ask you this, what does that mean? Because from what we see in the Nina project, we see that this is the memories that she is seeing, and when she finally does that at the end during the massacre at Hawkins' lab, Brenner basically says that she is doing it. They're finally doing it. So the question is if this is another memory invading, then obviously that should not be what she's seeing in all of these memories or these videos that they're showing her during the Nina Project experiments. Because logically, it just makes no sense. He straight up says it's another memory invading. So the biggest question is that actually another memory invading, or is this the memory that he is showing her and he just lied straight to her face? And once again, Papa doesn't always tell the truth. Remember that, people. But this is what I'm going to leave you here with, okay? Basically, Brenner says to her, okay, he goes, you have demons in your past, which is why they need to proceed carefully, and that they need to proceed one step at a time, because if they move too quickly, that 11 can become lost in the darkness. And if she becomes lost in the darkness, then everyone will become lost in the darkness. So let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you that question again. Do you guys think that this is factual, the whole Nina project, okay, that 11 is seeing her own memory, or that she is seeing someone else's memory and she is just in place of that person during this? So basically that they are showing her somebody else's memory, but she is trying to create her own way, leave her own train station, and create this memory as her own. And then I'm going to ask you this as well, okay, how he says that if they move too quickly with remembering the truth, that you can become lost in the darkness, okay? Do you guys think that we have already seen a character like this? And more specifically, Terry Ives being Mama, which we also get hints of in the Plinko conversation, okay? Because in my opinion, people, when we see Mama and we see 11 connect with Mama and kind of get that vision or that memory that Mama has, right? Where do we actually see Mama in her mindset, okay, people? We see her lost in the darkness. So did Mama move too quickly is the question. And then this, which is going to probably piss a lot of people off, but I don't care, because in the Plinko theory, we talked about it, so go check that one out. But in that Plinko conversation, which I'm going to connect right here, because right after we see this conversation and 11 is getting back in the Nina Project tank, basically, if you look real quickly at one of the screens that she's about to be watching or trying to memorize, all right? If you look real quickly at that one screen, it looks like 11 is putting the Plinko chip down, which happens to be the next memory that we see later on in this episode, okay? Which is very interesting. But how I said it might piss you off. There's two people that Henry mentions during that Plinko conversation, which I said we talked about in the Plinko theory, but there's two people, and one of those people is Mama. And basically that connects Mama now to both conversations in both memories, all right? One with somebody being lost in the darkness, and then in the Plinko theory, she is mentioned specifically by Henry Creel, okay? But like I said, there's one other person, and that person is number 8 being Kali, okay? And she is mentioned in the Plinko theory, okay, and during that Plinko scene. And basically what Henry says to her is, when 8 used to be here, okay, he says those words specifically, that when 8 used to be here. So this is what I'm going to leave you with, okay? If we jump all the way back to season 2 real quickly, the Lost Sister episode, okay, why does Kali say that when Kali returned to the Rainbow Room, 11 was no longer there then? So no doubt in my mind, we have some mix-ups, people, and I need to know your thoughts, and I hope you guys like this one, but there is some fake or non-truthful stuff going on involving the Nina Project, involving Elle, involving Mama, involving 11. I think I just said Elle twice, but whatever. But let me know your thoughts, people, and cheers to 1,000 subs. Thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone, and we are going to jump into the Memory Theory Part 3 very, very, very soon, I promised you. And thank you, thank you, thank you to everyone who keeps subscribing, liking, following this journey, and you guys already know, we out.